what I want to talk about is an objective appraisal from the point of view of the masters of what's going on the planet right now, because I find that very helpful so that we can sort of know what to expect. The, the one of the mysteries of planet Earth at this time is that we have evidence, either in legend or in artifacts, of a much higher level of consciousness on this planet than the ordinary way we have of thinking about history. The ordinary Western way of thinking about history is there was the Neanderthal, and then we gradually have gone sort of up the mountain, and now we're here, which is extremely depressing, actually, because, like, we're here. You know, this is, like, not a really impressive place to be, but there's just this straight line belief, which is supported by a lot of mainstream people's way of thinking. You have anomalies. One of the most notable is the pyramids of Egypt, which, according to the movies, were built by a whole bunch of slaves who dragged these rocks up and then placed them like that. But when you examine the way those pyramids are built, they're the fineness of the way they were built, the exactness, nobody has technology that can do that. No matter how many slaves you strap on and pull those rocks up, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, that is one example, and there's countless others of carvings and statues and art and footprints, shoe prints, you know, that show a handmade shoe with nails that's embedded in rock that makes it thousands and millions of years old, that a human being was walking around with a manufactured shoe at a time when they were supposed to be just apes, you know, just above apes. I mean, and then there's countless other examples, you know. Every time they have a archaeological something that doesn't fit, they call it a religious relic and they just stick it somewhere, you know. But various times, and I'm not an expert in this, but this is little bits that I know, you know, sometimes a scientist will look at something that's a religious artifact. I remember one particular, and it was a sophisticated battery, and he recognized it, but the timing was completely goofy. So the tradition in many ancient civilizations, preserved most especially through India, because India is it's the only continuous culture on the planet. Egypt, Babylon, Rome, all of them had their heyday and then fell to pieces, and then a whole different culture came in, whereas India has been the same culture literally for thousands of years. They've risen and fallen in terms of other factors, but it's always been the same civilization. And their tradition is, and as I said, other ancient cultures have had the same one, where you have an ascending cycles and descending cycles. You have was it the Greeks? Men, men, heroes, demigods, and gods. 4 stages of the way that the planet was. The age of just ordinary humans, the age of heroic humans, the age of those who are half divine, then the age of the divine. Or you have, you know, the iron, the brass, the silver, the gold. These are very, very common legends, so to speak. And the Indian culture has the same one. But the Indian culture has refined it. And Yogananda, in his autobiography of a yogi, and his guru, Sri Yukteswar, have delineated this very exactly. One of the reasons they've delineated it exactly is that there is a mistaken tradition, which is dominant in India even today, that contradicts what I'm about to say. There's no Indians in the room, so nobody's going to argue with me. Okay. When we were in Latvia or in Estonia, there is an Indian in the room, but he's not going to argue with me. Yeah, okay. But because you've been out of India for a long time. But where we were in Estonia, there was an Indian man, that young man, he came and argued with me. Yeah, he felt the need to argue with me. So, you know, I didn't feel the need to argue with him, but he felt the need to argue with me. The explanation given by Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar is that And this is scientifically verified nowadays. Much of this is being verified from other sources. The center of the galaxy is an enormous energy source. And our Earth, our whole solar system, is that the right word for it? Our whole solar system is on an elliptical orbit because we have a dual that holds us in an orbit. And we're on an elliptical orbit that moves us closer to the center of the galaxy and then farther away from it. And this is not, this is not myth and this is not metaphysics. This is the physical world. The closer our solar system is to that center of the galaxy, the more energy begins to come to this planet. And therefore, human beings, the inhabitants of the planet, perceive more and more subtle realities. And then as our solar system, drawn by this elliptical orbit, is drawn farther away, we begin to lose connection with those higher realities. So the nadir of our distance from the planet was 500 years after the death of Christ, AD. That was the nadir. We were the farthest away. The 4 ages in the Indian way of saying it, which could be iron, brass, gold, and silver and gold, Kali, which means dark, which is the age where everybody perceives matter as the only reality. The second age, which is just called Dwapara, which means second, is the age in which mankind as a whole begins to realize that energy is really the power. Einstein himself declared that matter isn't even fixed. It's just a pattern of energy. But also we begin to perceive energy. First we start with fossil fuels, then we get to electricity, then we get more and more subtle ways. We start with water wheels, and then we move upward. That's the second age. The third age is called Treta, which simply means third. And the age of Treta is we begin to understand the power of thought. So that's the age of thought. And then the fourth age is called Satya. Satya means truth, and that's when we understand the power of spirit. And now this is a global phenomenon. This is not individual destiny. And so where we are in this, the whole cycle is 24,000 years, and there are various, and I'm not expert enough, there's various astronomical phenomenon that relate to that. 24,000 years ascending, 12,000 years ascending, we reach the apex, and then 12,000 years descending. And the way it is Kali, matter, energy, thought, spirit. And then when we reach the top, it's spirit rising, and then the way it descends is that spirit begins, the age that was ascending and getting more and more enlightened reaches its apex, and then as the planet begins to move farther away, on this planet, people begin to lose what they understood, and then you start going down. And so then you get to here, and the pyramids were about Treta descending. Okay, the power of thought. Am I right about that, or is it Dwapara? Treta descending, the power of thought. So they understood because, at that point, they still understood the power of thought. So Swami Kriyananda wrote a little fictional book for children, actually. And he talked about, it was time travel for children. And when he got to the pyramids, he presented it as they were built by the power of sound waves, which is interesting. And I said to Swami, it's great writing fiction because you don't have to support your intuition at all. You can just declare it. But he said that because it was intuitive, his understanding. I mean, just for a moment, think about it. Now every pregnant woman can get a picture of her baby in the womb, and we call that an ultrasound. Nobody even thinks about it, do you? And if you have kidney stones, they used to have to cut you open and take them out. Now they put you in a bath, and then they dissolve the kidney stone, not dissolve your whole body. They dissolve the kidney stone with directed sound waves. And once again, we just do that. You just get in the bath, and they shoot you with sound waves. You don't even think about it, right? Because we're just becoming accustomed to that. So what is the limit of that technology, which was completely unknown to us just a few decades ago. So then we go down again, we get to Dwapara, the age of energy, and then we hit the age of matter again. We just gradually descend. Then we have Kali that just gets worse and worse, and then finally it turns and starts coming up the other side. Where we are, Kali Yuga ended. There's a transition. Each age is that the higher ages are longer than the lower ages. 1,200 years for Kali, 2,400 years for Dwapara, 3,600 years for Treta, 4,800 years for Satya, and then exactly the same thing coming down, with transition periods that are correspondingly a little longer, depending on which age we're moving through. So first understand that this is something that happens that gives this planet certain characteristics. Bye-bye, dear. That gives this planet certain characteristics, but it doesn't have anything to do, the physical world does not determine our inner consciousness. Because Jesus was born at the worst time getting worse. And Jesus was fully enlightened, and all his disciples were fully enlightened. It's just the backdrop in which the real drama, which is individual expansion of consciousness, takes place. So you can't just say, I'll just hold on to Earth, and I'll just keep coming back here until it gets enlightened, and you won't automatically get enlightened with it. And in fact, if your consciousness is not suitable for such a refined age, you will go to a planet that is having a different experience. Or you come into the planet that's having a very dark age, but your job is to bring light into that environment. Now, because human consciousness is free, is independent of that. And there's just reasons. I mean, the presence of Jesus and all his disciples planted into that declining age, a vision of light and freedom, which was very significant carrying it through and has continued to influence us. So Kali Yuga started transitioning in the year 1700, and Kali Yuga came to an end in 1900, which is now 124 years ago. And what happens when we really start into that is, now think about it, the age of matter. I was just looking at one of the country roads when we were driving through, because there's parts of this country that are so much more pristine. And when we were leaving the priest place, it was beautiful green fields, and we were on this road that was just, cutting its way through that. And also traveling here, and I think in Latvia also, because I'm not accustomed to the kind of weather that you have here, it's like kind of a mysterious mystery to me. And driving through some of those more country areas where there would be a stone house here, and then some kilometers later there'd be another stone house, and then be one over here, and I would think, my God, when the winter descends and there's all that snow, and the only way you can travel is either on foot or in a horse-drawn wagon or something, like what extraordinary isolation would come to you. And because if you could only walk, and you don't have a little snowmobile, and you don't have a four-wheel drive truck, now you can just get in your vehicle, and it's all designed, and you can still do it. It's still an effort. But you see, when all you had was physical, you'd have horses, or you'd have your physical body. You didn't have machines. You didn't have gasoline. You didn't have propane. You didn't have electric cars. And so everything about your world would be different, including how incredibly separated you would be. I'm watching Dmitry when he was here. He speaks Estonian, he speaks English, he speaks Russian. He was commenting, he said, I drive a few hours and I get to Lithuanian. I don't understand a word of what's being spoken around me. Maybe he has other languages besides that. But all of a sudden, just this little tiny distance, a wholly different culture, different religious basis, different language. And you can see how in Kali Yuga, when you could hardly travel, everybody seems so different from each other. Because in the material world, things are different. You know, I'm holding this cup, I'm holding this glass. Einstein says they're both energy patterns, but they sure seem separate to me, you know? And if your culture is not, your global culture can't perceive the unifying factor of energy, everything is very, very divided. And of course, that's the world we're coming out of. And the world we're moving into is the age of energy, where, first of all, here I am, you know, and it didn't take me 6 months on camelback or donkey or rowboat to get here. I just got on a plane in the morning and got off at night, and here we are. Just like this. It took a little time. It took more time than apparently it's going to take us in Treta Yuga, when I can just transport myself by the power of thought, you know? And once we begin to do that, that'll also seem normal to us, just like this seems normal to us. But in the age of Kali, everything is separate. Religions are separate, countries are separate, languages are separate, cultures are separate, races are separate. Everybody just lives in their little box. We don't know how to get out of it. Now, in that same time, I was in India, and my friend was telling me about Americans always being at war. I read remarkable stories of young people, you know, who have, like, in whatever country we were bombing, they were on the internet talking to American children when the planes are overhead and their country is being bombed, and maybe their fathers are trying to defend it, but the children are talking to each other. And you can see how impossible it's going to be to sustain that separateness, because energy, access to all these ways of using energy, just make it impossible, because energy unites us. Thought will unite us more, and consciousness, spirit, will unite us above all. So we're in a transition still from the age of matter to the age of energy. And Yogananda was very, okay, let me just add the last thing. Yogananda and Sri Yukteswar say that in the last descending Kali age, a profound misunderstanding came into the culture of India, and they think we have 400,000 years more of Kali Yuga. So when we announce that, no, we're out of Kali Yuga, we're in Dwapara Yuga, many Indians will argue with you. Sri Yukteswar and Yogananda said, no, and it's self-evident. Think of how everything has changed since 1900. In 1900, you walked or went with your horse. And I don't know if it's used here, but in the United States, when the cars started being invented, you knew how powerful the car was by saying it has 20 horsepower. You know, that machine it can do what 20 horses could do. I don't know if they still use that anymore, but like, tell me, how much can 20 horses do? Like, who even knows? Whereas at the time, it was really a way to communicate, which is already just completely behind us. And the computer that sent the first shot to the moon is less powerful than, I don't have one of those watches, than you have in your watch. And who knows how any of that works, but we just take it for granted. So Sri Yukteswar and Yogananda weren't just being dogmatic. They said, look, everything has changed in the timing that they declared. Now, these transitions between yugas are often very tumultuous, because the whole fabric of the culture is shifting over. And this, from material to Dwapara, is a very tumultuous one, because, and now this goes back to the astral world, that all I'm talking about is the physical, cultural characteristics of this planet. It has nothing to do with our enlightenment or not. We come here because the conditions suit us. And Divine Mother, like all mothers, loves all her children. And she loves her naughty children too. And she wants her naughty children to have a chance to become less naughty. So there's a lot of people coming into this planet now who are basically here because when you move from Kali to Dwapara, a lot of things get to be destroyed. And it's a time of tremendous tension because there's this completely changing understanding of human life and our relationship to each other. And then there's also this established habit of wanting things to be separate because it serves those who wish to hurt others, to be able to have an enemy that you can identify, that you can do your best to annihilate. That's what's happening in the U.S. right now. The newly elected president has risen on demonizing others. Very common strategy. You've seen it many times. When we were where the priest was, we heard about another priest from 100 years ago, or 100 years earlier, 1865, where the Russian Tsar decided that he would eliminate the country, the language, and the religion. Just like complete idiotic. But nonetheless, for some reason, that served whatever karma he had to try to do it, and this very brave priest was eventually executed because he wasn't willing to let the country, the culture, and the religion be obliterated. Because one of the things that happens on the material plane is sometimes, let me say it more clearly. This world is a school for us to learn necessary lessons of consciousness. It is not intended to be a perfect world. And the more we think, but somehow the purpose is not being fulfilled, it's supposed to be a perfect world, we're just banging our head against a brick wall. This is the nature, and it's especially so right now. Yogananda predicted 75 years ago, he predicted, Kriyananda heard him with a passion that made it seem like it was coming tomorrow. He predicted 2 world wars. He predicted very serious economic depression as the transition. And what you see right now is you see a great number of people who have a lot of power, including military, national budgets, and nuclear weapons, who are determined that we are not in a higher age, that all of this sort of making us one is just a grave mistake, and we need to divide ourselves up again. And some of us who are better than others have to have more power, and then if necessary, we need to obliterate those who are not like us. And it's a very strong force with a lot of power. They want the future to look like the past. And they're in rebellion against this rising energy. On the other side, and there are a vast number of these people because I've traveled in many countries now, and there are many, many who realize that times have changed, the reality is different, there's this new wonderful energy coming in, and in all kinds of ways, they are trying to create the future the way it is divinely intended to be. And in more stable times, when you're not in a transition like this, most people just kind of hang out in the middle. They're not really very forward-looking. They're not really very backward-looking. Things just go along. So the global consciousness looks like a fat cigar. Most everyone hangs out in the middle. And, there's a few really good people and a few really bad people, but most people just live their lives. In times like this, the middle there's no space in the middle. The middle is just wire thin. And there's this effort to hold us down, and then there's this other effort for people who are catching the wave and rising up. That's where we are right now. However, the masters say, and the masters say anybody with a brain can see it right now, that this conflict is not going to resolve easily. We still have these crazy tyrants who are trying to oppress and trying to take over. You all know this far better than I do because you've lived through it and it's on your borders. I'm thousands of miles away. In the U.S. right now, this same force is doing a very good job of dividing the citizenry of the U.S. against itself. And we're in our country. I mean, that the person who's been elected president has promised to just sweep up everybody that isn't like us and throw them back into the sea, basically, which is just unthinkable to people like us, but not to people like them. So all of this saying, but however, Dwapara Yuga is here because we are moving closer. So there's no chance that on any enduring basis, the future is going to look like the past. But these two forces are going to have to work themselves out. And Yogananda said after this conflagration, he said, his phrase was, mankind, sick to death of war and violence, will usher in multiple centuries of peace and prosperity like this planet has never known. However, war continues all the way through Dwapara Yuga, all the way through Treta Yuga. It doesn't even stop until Satya Yuga. And if people can go to war, they're still crazy. But bear in mind, this planet is just a university. So you come here if the circumstances are going to help you grow. And once you die, you're off the planet. It doesn't make any difference. And if it's not your home, you won't come back to it. It's like in a big opera, you can have this beautiful set behind you, but the real story is the singers and the drama and the costumes, but the set contributes. That's exactly where we are. The planet and its experiences are the backdrop. The real drama is what we're doing. I mean, each of us individually, learning how to love, learning how to serve, learning how to choose happiness, learning how to not be afraid. Because fear is based on the belief that there's nobody in charge and they don't know what they're doing. And this is why it has to come down. Yogananda said the entire purpose of the hard times that are coming, he said, is to bring people closer to God. Because we've just lost our connection, not with God in terms of the dogmatic religion that has been characteristic of Kali Yuga. See, Kali Yuga is all divided up. My way is right and it's different from yours. When it's energy, God becomes, the Sanskrit word is Satchidananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. It's to bring us back to our true nature, and that will be the end point. And he said, those who are already learning those lessons, and the phrase he used was, will be protected. Swami Kriyananda himself said, at what level? Nobody can keep you from dying. So what does that mean, protected? Except here's the common sense part of it. The only reason we face hard challenges is because we need to embrace a more expansive reality. So if we're already embracing a more expansive reality, we don't need to be pushed so hard because we're already in motion in the right direction. And this is the other reason for everything we were talking about this morning. Don't resist, get engaged. Because if you get engaged, you're getting ahead. And also you are making yourself helpful. If there's just some understanding of where this is going, that it's a temporary transition, but it's going to be a hard one. Now, there's another part of it which may be helpful. Everything that's created, it has three distinct phases of creation. The first part is an idea, a thought form somewhere. I always use the example of a building. Here's this building. Who knows how long it's been sitting here? It has many interesting and charming characteristics. This top level is really beautiful. This building wasn't here at some point. And somebody had the idea, I could put a building there, right? In fact, maybe 20 people had the idea that they could put a building here. But an idea alone is not sufficient to make something happen. You have to put energy behind that idea. You have to put sufficient intelligent energy behind that idea. And so maybe of the 20 people, one not only had the idea, but he put sufficient intelligent energy behind it. Now, so think of how much energy has to go in to make this happen. You have to first, get the idea, then you have to figure out how you can own the land, so then you have to have the money to do that. Then you have to get the architectural plans, then you have to get a crew, and then you have to supervise that crew, and you have to make sure they don't mess it up. All of that energy goes into it, and then finally, what do you know? You have a building. So we tend to think, because we have a bias to honor the material plane rather than the more subtle planes, by the time something is manifested, that's the real reality of it. But by the time it's manifested, it's on its way out. Because somewhere else there's an idea, and somewhere else there's energy being put into that idea that eventually is going to manifest differently from this one. Just going through your city here, you see, the old structures, then you see the new structures and the newer structures, and the old ones are being pushed out. Some of them are being protected and preserved. But, the new ideas and the energy people putting into them, they're quite different. So now, the old idea is greed, self-aggrandizement, personal power, national power, military violence. And those ideas are very, very well established, but they're Kali Yuga ideas. They're very old ideas. And the new ideas are universal brotherhood, oneness of all mankind. We're all children of the same divine mother. We could make this world certainly better than it is. When I went to India for the first time, which was in 1986, and I'd never been out of, I'd been to Europe by then, but I'd never been out of the Western world. And in 1986, India had not yet begun its extraordinary economic climb, which is what you see now. And I remember, you come in at 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and I'm in the tourist bus because I was leading I was leading a tour to a country I'd never been to. But that was, other people knew that part of it. I knew the spiritual side of it, so I was able to fake it with my knowledge. And the others made everything else happen. And I'm going down this darkened street, and on the median, I see these sort of little piles, which turned out to be people who were living living in the divider of the two sides of the highway, with their little blankets, just sleeping there. But the thought that came to me was, we have all the money, we have all the technology in the world to make everybody on this planet safe and well. What we don't have is the desire to do it. Just like that, because we're still caught in our sense of separateness, and I have to take care of myself, and we're too distantly separated from each other to fully appreciate it like that. And then I realized, because even then I was engaged as I am now, that trying to change the human heart is an act of enormous political importance, because I'm politically active, even though for years in the United States I didn't even vote, because that this is where the solution lies. And this is also what we have to really understand. We are the new ideas. We have to put energy into those ideas, and then they will manifest, because we're going into Dwapara. If this were Dwapara descending, and see, right after Jesus was crucified, his people just washed their hands of society. There was no point in trying to build up anything based on this new teaching, because everything was just, the whole civilization was too low. And it was going down to 500 AD when the barbarians just swept through and destroyed what there was. And so and I say they were lucky, they just got to go out into the desert and set up their little societies and live in caves and just say goodbye to the whole thing. This time, we have to build a new society. So far from being able to just turn our backs on it, we find ourselves in the middle of it. We're not in monasteries. We have families. We're associated with our families. We have careers. We have working in innovative industries. Just making the new technology that's going to make the age of energy happen, or the new art, or the new music, whatever it might be. And we're giving it to society because this is the idea. We're putting the energy into it, and then we're going to manifest it, right? Like that. That's where we are. But Yogananda was fierce, and Swami Kriyananda was also fierce in really saying, in really wanting us to understand that it's going to get harder before it gets easier. And I knew Swami from 1969, and I mean from 1971, but actually once I was living with him at 71, living in the community, every year Swami would say, well, this may be the year. This may be the year when the economy collapses, when the negativity becomes global. I don't know. But it hasn't been yet, but we do see deteriorating conditions. But the good news is it's all to clear the deck for something more. When I talk about these teachings, I generally say there's about 4 things that a person needs to really understand. One needs to understand what karma is. You need to understand the possibility of reincarnation. It helps if you understand the chakras, because the chakras explain how destiny expresses in the individual. You can go to my YouTube site and find classes on all these subjects. Just type them into the question box. And then the 4th one is to understand the Yugas, because it makes you less concerned, might not be right, but at least it gives some clarity to what we're looking at. And then you don't have to feel quite so helpless. And we also then don't have to be naive about what's going on. I think I expressed it in various classes, but I'll say it again here. Light is the only reality. And there is no such thing as light and darkness, but there is energy that can block the light. So I talk about light and shadow. But shadow is just something that blocks the light, doesn't extinguish it, it doesn't diminish it, and as soon as the block is removed, the light is exactly the same. Right now there's a lot of what I lovingly call shadow people on the planet who are really blocking the light. But everything is energized. That's what makes it worse, because all this energy is coming in, so those who are using that energy for shadow are getting more and more powerful, which is alarming to those who are using the energy for light. But the society based on attunement to that light is still being energized. But the society based on the attunement to shadow is dominant. But it will implode. Unfortunately, there'll be collateral damage, which will be a lot of us in our world. But as Swami pointed out, once you're in the astral world, it doesn't matter how you got there. As soon as you exhale for the last time and you're out of your body, it's over. Your relationships are not over. Your love is not over. The people that you care about, that's not ended. But you've walked off the stage. I had a dream once. It was a wonderful dream. I should have talked about this when I was talking about dreams. I have a friend of mine, a man, a strong man, very nice man, very good friend of mine. We had an appointment, and we were meeting on what looked to me like a giant stage in a big theater, although I couldn't really see it. But that was a big empty stage, and I was meeting him because it was time for him to cut my head off. And we were just very casual about it. We were getting together because it was time for him to cut my head off, and he had one of those battle axes, like a cartoon with a tall thing and the big round thing like that. We were very modern. He was dressed quite modern, but what he was holding was one of those battle axes. And there was something like a tree trunk or something that was in the middle, and he was holding his battle axe, and I'd come there to have my head chopped off. And we were chatting, and, he's a good friend. I really liked him. He was friendly toward me. And it was just the whole thing. This is what we're going to do. So we chatted, kind of had a little exchange of pleasantries. We just exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, and then we thought we had to get on with it. And because I was just cooperating, I just laid my head down like this, and he picks up the battle axe, just like a cartoon. And just as he raises it, it crosses my mind, oh my gosh, this could hurt. And just as I thought that, I remembered something that Yogananda said, which is when the soul sees that the body is about to be finished, the soul will exit from the body before the body is actually hurt. Like people in car accidents, often, just before impact, they're suddenly above, even if they eventually come back in. But it's like, this is not a place I want to be. I think I'll move out of it. So I'm here like this. He's coming down with the axe. I'm concerned about the pain. And then in that same instant, I'm pulled out. And all of a sudden, just like, all the movies, I'm up above, and I'm more than that, I'm shooting away like this. And in the dream, I couldn't quite see what was going on, but I knew that this was over. And then, in the sweetest way, I said, "Bye-bye, Asha." Some of my friends who've heard me say that every so often, they'll say to me, "Bye-bye, Asha," just like that. And then I woke up and I was so happy. Not because I had my head cut off, but because, even in my sleep, I understand. This might hurt. No, it won't. God will take care of you. And then just, okay, we're done. We're just done. We did it. We did the best we could, and now we're on to a new adventure. And everybody, God's going to take care of everybody. It's going to be fine. And that's what we're looking for. Because there could be some really hard days and nights. But we just need to have that deeper understanding. And the American election was a disappointment to me, but I was also very interested. I thought everything happens by the will of God. And for me, that's not a platitude, because I've spent years and years examining every situation, especially the ones that are hard for me, and just ask that question, how could this be happening outside the will of God? And that's the kind of discipline that I'm encouraging all of you. Just measure everything by the highest potential that you can sincerely grasp, not by somebody told you, least of all me, but just by the highest potential that you actually can hold on to with something that's really you. And just train yourself to just keep turning your consciousness in that direction. Well, here's one more thought, and then I'll ask if you have any questions. There's a man, 50 years ago, in the U.S. at least, a much more mature understanding of death and dying began to permeate the society. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was very well known, and she started, instead of, as the medical profession feels, that death is the enemy that must be fought at all costs, we have to realize that death is inevitable. When my aunt was 89, and it was clear that she wouldn't live too much longer, and we were talking about it, the phrase was, death is not a medical emergency. You don't have to frantically call somebody to try to keep it from happening. It's just what happens. So she started really researching, and she was a psychiatrist, I believe, and she started really working with it. A gentleman named Stephen Levine, an American man, came up behind her, and he was also doing this. And here's what he said was so interesting. Let me get this correctly. Part of the process that is not always present, but sometimes present, is if a person begins to lose the capacity to move their body, which is what begins to happen. The life force withdraws from the edges back to the center. The same as we come into the body, we die in the same way. So a person can still be even perfectly cogent, but they can't move like they used to move. And then you can't get out of bed. I remember when a friend of mine was in the last days of her life, she was lying very awkwardly on the pillow. And one of her friends says, that looks like an awkward position. Why don't you put your head on the pillow? And she just said from this position, you have no idea how extremely difficult it would be for me to move my head at this point. I mean, her mind was still there, but the body wasn't there anymore. So that can happen. And Stephen Levine was saying that Very often, you see, our habit of life is when there's some kind of disturbance in our consciousness, we will move our body and do something with our body in an attempt to calm what's going on in our minds. You know, if you're inclined that way, you'll open a beer, you'll pour yourself a shot of whiskey, wine. You'll just do something to anesthetize the mind. You'll turn on the television, even more dynamically, but still through the body. You'll go to the gym. I myself, I swim for exercise, and I started swimming for my brain, not for my body, because I realized stress, emotional upset and stress had a physiological manifestation, and if I could interrupt the progress of that physiological change, then I could head off the stress. And so I did what I called throwing myself into the swimming pool. And when I was first understanding this 30-some years ago, literally, if I felt I had the freedom of my schedule, when I felt stress or any emotional upset building in me, I'd stop what I was doing and I'd go swimming, because that process would cure or at least would mitigate what was going on in my consciousness. So it was a wholesome response, but it still depended on my being able to move my body. It was a problem of consciousness that I solved by moving my body. So he talked about there's often a point in the dying process when you can no longer solve the problems of consciousness through your body. And he said often people become very agitated at that point because suddenly all they have is their consciousness. He said almost always it will last for a short time, relatively speaking, and then there'll be a certain surrender. And then a person will pass through that transition and then will be at peace with the fact that I can't do this. But his advice, try to solve the problems of consciousness on the level of consciousness. Because then you're really building for yourself. You know, if we have the freedom to go swimming, if we have enough food in the refrigerator, if we are physically able to go out, if we have the personal freedom to be able to choose, but all of those are big ifs, aren't they? And sooner or later, we will be just left with our consciousness. So as much as possible, and of course that doesn't mean don't use your body while you can still use it. Of course you should. But as much as possible, when you're unsettled on any level, see how far you can take it just with, well, my actual final line is, how could this be happening outside the will of God? I mean, that to me is like, if I can get to there, then everything is fine. It might not be pleasant. It might be very challenging. I might prefer that it be different, but also it means that I have to adjust. And it also means if Divine Mother is sending this, there has to be a message. There has to be a reason behind it. As I think it's in the Rubaiyat. I can't remember the exact source, but the one who made us, it's in the Rubaiyat, the one who made us truly loves us, and if death or difficulty is part of what happens to us, it must be an expression of that love. You see, that's a very challenging thought, but also you can see how much power there is in it. Okay? So, questions, comments, wails of protestation? Right? You know, I have this Instagram channel. What is that the word channel? Is that what you call it? Page is the word. Okay, I have an Instagram page. And there's lots of little reels, and so in 90 seconds I explain all of the law of karma or something like that, you know. But enough. But I get comments like, I wrote, there was something about karma, which, I mean, I'm not making this up. This is ancient Indian teaching. And you know, and then somebody just writes, no, that's not how it is. And then they say, this is how it is. Yeah, it's like, sure, like, great, if that's what you think. I mean, one of those I had to answer myself. said, look, I'm not making this up. It's not my opinion. This is ancient wisdom. But if you think that karma works differently, great, try it, see how it works for you. Because this is very challenging.